Well, Mr. Charles King Benford started Royal Undertaking Company. And Mr. Charles King Benford was the son of Henry Claxton Benford and Mary Frances Henley. I didn't say that right.
Don't say it again. So,
I'm sorry.
No problem. We can cut.
Where did I get Mary from?
Any time.
That's not her name.
Just stop and say it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're going to tell me when? Okay.
Anytime. Anytime.
Mr. Charles King Benford started Royal Undertaking Company in 1918. Mr. Benford was the son of Henry Claxton Benford and Frances Henley Benford. These were two families. Mr. Benford's family owned the Huntsville Gazette, and Miss Henley's family owned the, we gotta stop again.
Okay, well, sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry.
Was it the Journal?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
The Journal. I'm sorry.
Okay, so no, the ownership again.
Okay. So we had, okay. We'll start. You want me to start again?
Please.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry.
Don't
I'm
worry
trying
about
not to be nervous. I've been up since 3
Oh,
o'clock
but you're lucky. You're talking
praying that this
Because
would all be
How I
fine.
edit is like word processing.
Okay.
I lay this down on a computer and it cut. It merges together automatically.
Okay.
And I can put dissolves in between, so
Okay.
you'll never see any improprieties on
Start
this.
from the top. So you know that it was the Gazette, and it was
The Journal.
Journal.
Royal Funeral Home, as it is known today, was started by Mr. Charles King Benford. It was named Royal Undertaking Company at that particular time. Now, Mr. Benford was the son of Mr. Henry Claxton Benford and Frances Henley Benford. And I mentioned the two of them being his parents, not only because they were his parents, but Mr. Benford's family owned the Gazette newspaper, which was a prominent newspaper, colored newspaper is what they referred to it as. And Miss Henley's family operated the Journal, which was another colored newspaper. And so this was kind of a merger of two prominent families. Mr. Benford, back to Mr. Charles Benford, Charles King Benford. He not only was an educator, but he owned an insurance company, and then he started the funeral business. Now, he operated until his death in 1940. Mrs. Carrie Benford, Mrs. Carrie Benford was the wife of Mr. Charles King Benford. She operated after his death for about 4 years, and then she decided that she wanted to move up north where her son, who was a physician, lived in Pennsylvania. So she prayed about this matter because it was very important to her that her husband's business perpetuate. So she approached my maternal grandfather, Lawrence B. Hundley, about purchasing the funeral home. And at the time, and this is in 1944,
Yes.
he told her he just was not interested in the funeral business. So another 2 years went by, and she went back and talked to my grandfather and my grandmother, which was Amanda Rice Hundley. And she told him she was very sorry, but the Lord had not shown her anyone else. She really did need to move, and she was not comfortable with leaving her husband's business in the hands of anyone else. She felt that if she sold him the business, that it would perpetuate. And she even at this point said, you know, I won't only sell you the business, I'll sell you my home, I'll sell you everything that goes with it. I'll make this a nice, neat package for you. And this time, he decided to do it, although it was sort of a sideline business. My grandfather was a supervisor at the Lincoln Mill during the time, and he had a side business that was similar to a dairy Dairy Queen. It sold burgers, fries, fried chicken, that kind of thing. And actually, that was located where the old office for Dr. Sonny Hereford and Dr. Lawrence Hundley, where that building was built, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So this time, they decided to go ahead, and when my grandfather, when he moved the business to, it was Oak Avenue at that time, it wasn't Gallatin Street at that time. He moved it into the old Benford home. And at that time, it became Royal Funeral Home. And most people, particularly my age, will remember that's the funeral home that was the same street as Gallatin Street, and it had the big green awning that went all the way out to the street. Now, let me flip just for a moment to my father, James A. Jones. Growing up, my father always wanted to be an undertaker. And part of that is he was raised by his grandparents, the Blackburns, which Blackburn Chapel was started by his grandfather, T.S. Jenkins Blackburn. Every Saturday, he would go to town with his grandfather. And at that time, Royal, which was located down on, I'm having a moment.
Gallatin.
No, well, this is when he's a child. This is like when he's a child. So it's located down on the first place. But anyway. Well,
Low. Gallatin Church.
no, it wasn't church. Holmes, I'm sorry, forgive me. It was located down on Holmes Street. And during that time, there were only certain stores that black people could shop in. And then in certain stores, you could not take your packages. So Royal was a place that people could go and rest, but they could always leave their packages. And my father told me it just fascinated him as a young person to see that everyone's packages were right where they left them. They didn't have to worry about anyone bothering their packages. There was a safe place. They could go there and rest in between their shopping. Also during that time when he was younger, most of the embalming was done in the home. And while he was a young person being raised by his grandparents, there were often other relatives that ended up being embalmed in the home. Of course, they would kind of shoo him away and tell him, you know, you don't need to see this, you go somewhere else. But he said he always would sneak back and he would watch the procedure through the keyhole. And he just thought it was just fascinating to see that particular procedure. So fast forward, my father becomes a janitor at Royal in 1949, which is 3 years after my grandfather took over the business. Fast forward again, my parents became educators. And at some point they moved to Washington, D.C. Now, Mr. Thomas Kibble was the embalmer for not only my grandfather, but for the Benfords as well. And in 1963, Mr. Kibble passed away. My grandfather called my father, and by this time my father has gone to mortuary school, and he also works for a funeral home in Washington, D.C. So he called him and he says, you know, Mr. Kibble's passed away. If you could just come here temporarily and help me by embalming until we can get a replacement. And actually at 3, I made that trip with him. Of course, I stayed with my grandmother, but my father and I both drove down here from Washington. Well, within about 4 years later, my mother and my father went into a lease purchase agreement with my grandfather, and they purchased the business. And so at that particular time, they were still located on Gallatin Street. But about 1969, there was talk about urban renewal coming through. And so my father and mother began to look for a new location. And so the new location was built here where we currently are, which was kind of considered out in the country at that particular time. We moved in here December of 1972, and this has been the home where we've resided ever since then. Growing up in the funeral home, my father had very specific rules. When we came here, we had to be quiet, we had to be still. In fact, we always had to remain in the rear of the funeral home. He would just explain to us, this is a place of reverence. This is not a place of play. You know, you can do your homework, but you can get some water, use the restroom, but this is a serious place. And even as children, we understood that we had to treat it as a place of reverence and respect. Of course, I will say this, the rules changed a little bit when I when I brought my son here. He was allowed to do a lot more things than my brother and I when we were growing up. But anyway, I guess that happens with grandparents. And so at some point, I started having conversations with my brother. And the reason I started having conversations with my brother is because my father always attended the professional conferences every year. And as a child, there were always activities in every city that the children of the funeral directors would attend. So it's kind of like a big family reunion. Every year you see the same kids and you kind of grow up with them. But when I was around 25, I started noticing that some of my friends were thrown in the business due to death or illness. And that just had a really profound effect on me. And I said, oh, I don't want this to happen to Royal. So I thought, because of the era I grew up in, I talked to my brother. I said, you're the son. You work for the government. You can transfer to Huntsville. You know, I have a family. We're living in Atlanta. Can you do this? But my brother just, he just didn't have an interest in the business. It wasn't, and we talked about it a lot. I said, well, a lot of times we don't have an interest in something, but we have to think about, you know, this is a business that's been in our family since 1946. This is something your father has been passionate about. You're the son. And he was pretty adamant about, it's not going to happen. You know, if you feel that strongly about it, you do it. And so at some point I went to mortuary school thinking that I would go to mortuary school, I would come here, do the apprenticeship, learn what I needed to learn from my father in 2 years, and I'd go back to Atlanta. But when I came here, I discovered that mortuary school can give you a great foundation, but this is a business that you really need on-the-job training. And even 33 years down the road, I'm still learning. I didn't just stop learning when I became licensed. It is a never-ending learning process because families are different and preparation of remains is very different. And so even though I'm 33 years down the road and I have quite a bit of experience, I'm still in a learning mode. And that is probably the number one lesson that it's hard to get over to younger people because they kind of come in the door knowing everything. And there are just some things that don't come up every week or every month or even every year. What we tried to do, and I'm so thankful for my husband because I always used to feel like, my husband had his own career and a great career. And I always felt like if he gives all this up and he comes here, I don't want the shoe to fall and it'd be a situation if it hadn't been for you and your family. To this day, he's never done that. What he has really done is helped me to build on the foundation that was laid. And we have tried to take this business to another level, to expand it, because that is what we should do if we have a family business. We cannot become stagnant. We can't just, it was important to us to continue renovations because this is a place for the families when they are going through a bereaved situation. It was very important to me to have a place that was not scary. One of the things about the funeral home on Gallatin with the creaky steps and the eerie music, but that was what happened during that particular time. I did not want children to come in this particular home and have any fear. And so we brightened it up because it was dark in the older place, and we tried to really make it more like a home. That's why we have rooms like this as opposed to kind of a harshness that was in the early days. Now, I will mention this. When I first came into this business, and I realize I'm jumping around a little bit, but when I first came in the business, I could tell that, well, first of all, this has been a male-dominated business, not just at Royal, but just in the industry. And I could tell that there was a thought, she's not going to last, she'll be gone. But what I had to do is I had to work harder. I worked just as hard for my father as I did when I was working for all the other businesses when I worked in Atlanta. That was important to me because you have to prove yourself and you have to put your time in. I've done everything from clean commodes to vacuum to wash cars. There are a lot of advantages that the newer employees have that a lot of us older ones did not have at that time. We had to do just multiple jobs in addition to making arrangements, going on funerals, the dressing, the casketing, all of that. There were several things that had to be done. I would come to work sometimes as early as 6 o'clock and I might not leave until after 10. But I thought that was important because I have to prove myself to these men that believe, she's not going to last. I also tried to bring in more women because I think women have a place in funeral service, whereas now you see a lot of women in funeral service. But in the older days, like when I was growing up, the women that I knew in funeral service, they either were married to funeral directors or they inherited the business through death of their father or their uncles or whatever. But I thought and I felt that women have a place in funeral service. And so we have quite a few women that work for us now. Now I'm going to go back to my husband. And I'm really grateful. I really have a grateful spirit because he has really just come in. He's learned. One of the things I'm happy about is he has the patience, like my father did, with working on people's relatives. My forte is more of working on the front end of the business and working with families. But my father was a mentor to him in that he would sit back there. He really just started out just sitting back there keeping him company. And my father was one, he just really didn't allow anyone to. That was a reverent place. You weren't allowed, if you didn't work back there, then you weren't allowed back there. But I guess since he wrangled my husband into moving here so that I would not go back to Atlanta, he did allow him to sit back there. And in his allowing him to sit back there, my husband began to notice all the different things that were required to try to bring someone back or restore them and make them have a presentable repose for their family members. And so this has not just been about Karen or the Joneses, but it really has been now the Smiths. And it's kind of funny because every now and then people will say, hello, Mr. Jones, to my husband. And it doesn't bother him. He'll answer. He'll say, hello, how are you? And he'll keep going. But he really deserves a lot of credit that a lot of times people will share with me. And I always try to share that with him because he has become a monumental source in how this business has progressed. He's a visionary person, and he has assisted me greatly in especially with renovations. A lot of renovations he has done personally, like this. Looking at what do you call that, huh?
Oh, the crackling,
The crack, yeah.
the wallpaper, just
And so we put a lot of our heart into the business. We still consider it a business that has to be handled with care.
Yes.
People have to be treated with respect. There is still the reverence aspect that is important to me. And I'm just grateful to be a part of not only a family, but a business that has lasted as long as it has. We're here today, and we may be the face that you see, but if it were not for those that came before us, and I want to say we're blessed, unlike a lot of businesses. We have Richard and Ronald Fletcher, the twins. They're still requested to work on services. They turned 90 back in October. They still work here. They are the kind of employees, if you ask them to be here at 10, they're here about 8:15. And they've been here since Richard started at 19, Ronald at 21. It's hard to find people to stick with the business 2 years, 3 years. But I will say we've been pretty blessed because most of our employees have stayed. I mean, they've stuck with us because this is not a business you can run by yourself. It takes a
culmination of a person's life when they pass, and things that from Social Security, taking care of closing out their Social Security, their insurance, from life insurance to retirement, helping the family file for benefits.
VA.
You have families that need help in coming together, and because now we have so many
Blended.
unfortunately broken families, families that don't really function well together, and you have to bring them together at the worst time of their life and get them to work together to honor their loved one. And so yes, you're being a counselor to them, and working that in a short period of time. I tell most people it's like getting married. You have months, maybe a year to arrange a marriage and invite people to the ceremony. Well, the same people are invited to the funeral, basically, and it's in days. And to try to remember to contact all the friends and relatives, to write a life story about a person in days, it's very tough. And with the pressure of phone calls and people trying to see you and consult with you, and having to turn that around in such a short period of time, it's very difficult and taxing on the family. So we have to step in and assist and try to help the family along the way in pulling all this information together. And it can be, or I won't say it can be, it is very draining on you. We have often mentioned when a person passes, and after you have serviced that family, it takes a piece of you. You are actually, her father would say, a funeral director dies
1,000 deaths before his own.
Because it takes a little bit away from you each time you have to sit with the family and work with them. And a person that has that's not compassionate really doesn't belong in the funeral industry. But a person that is compassionate, it takes a little bit away from you each time. a family may experience that one death, and you have made that arrangement, but within another hour or two, you're going to experience it again, and then you're going to experience it again, and then you have to go through that service with them over and over every day. And after, and like you said, it's 7 days a week. So it takes that much away from you. So when we have a chance to, which is not that often, to get away and have a moment, you really, really appreciate and cherish every minute and moment you have. We have friends that will tell us, well, let's go out and have a great time, you know, and it's like, well, for me, having a good time is maybe just sitting and relaxing. And it's a wonderful time doing absolutely nothing.
One last question. And we're talking about our current generation, just people today. And I don't know where I heard it from, but someone's slogan was, you never know the moment. You never know when it will happen. But most people put on the back burners insurance, planning, and preparing themselves for this situation where you'll have to deal with post-life situations. How important is it to plan ahead, either setting aside prepaying for your burial or having the proper insurance to handle it? Because like I said, you never know when the situation will happen. As a matter of fact, in economic times like this, when people get their employment, the first thing they're altering is usually, I don't need that insurance here and there, I don't need that. And suddenly something happens and they're not covered.
We've often stated it's much easier to pay $25, $50 a month than $10,000 at one time. And that's what typically happens. Families that don't plan, usually it's very stressful. It's added stress. And then with most people eventually, it's so expensive to bury or to have a service. And I usually tell them, oh, it's really not. It's really very inexpensive. The first thing is like, well, are you kidding? I said, no. Because if you add up how much money you have spent on automobile insurance, as long as you have that automobile, you're going to pay insurance. As long as you live. Homeowners insurance, you're going to pay that. You're going to pay insurance on health insurance, which is dental insurance. There's insurance just about on appliances. There's
animals.
Yeah, you know, and with a burial, you can actually pay for a burial in advance, and that money is put into a trust, which grows, which offsets inflation. So a service that you may buy today for $8,000, 20 years from now may be a $25,000, $30,000 service, but you're going to receive the benefit of a $30,000 service.
Because you're locked in. What I also want to say about that is, when you have an at-need family, there are a series of questions that you need to ask them. And it's like question after question after question. And these are just, you know, maybe anything from the death certificate to when we're going to have the funeral, when would you like us to have the person. There are a series of questions. And then we have to talk about finances, because there's this governmental agency called Federal Trade Commission that requires us to talk about pricing. And then we have to talk about merchandising, which means you have to go into a room that no one really wants to go in, and you have to make a selection. What I've noticed with the families that pre-plan, all they have to do is tell us what day and time they want to have it. I already have the plan, so I know what what they want. It's ordered, it's there. They just basically tell us that. The other thing I've noticed is there is absolutely zero, no confusion when people have pre-planned. Because it becomes amazing when you're making arrangements and mama told this child something and this child was told, because these are real life situations, and we realize no one wants to talk about death. And a lot of people feel like if I talk about death, I'm speaking it into existence. But if they could just spend a day in the life with the funeral director, pre-planning, even if you don't pay for it in advance, you need to write down. There are a lot of things, memories get dim. When it comes to writing an obituary, write down the facts of your life. I had an aunt that lived to be 99 years of age. And she told me, whenever anything happens, look under the bed. I have something that'll be helpful to you. I kind of forgot about it. But as my mother started preparing the obituary, it kind of triggered in my mind. And what did I find? She had written down all the facts of her life. She wrote down the order of service, which was very helpful. And it really saved us a lot of time, because when you're writing an obituary, you're grieving, you might write a bit, you're crying, it's a lot of interruption, plus people, as much as they mean well, they're calling you, they're coming to the house, you're being constantly interrupted. So anything, I try to tell people anything that you can do ahead of time. It's because who knows you better than you? And a lot of times people don't understand, your children, they know you from the point they came on the scene, but you had a whole life prior to that. So I encourage people to pre-plan, and you do lock in on the price. I want to use one example. I had a gentleman that did a pre-plan with my father in '89. He lived to be 104 years old. He got the exact same service, everything he planned with my father. Now, of course, it was paid in full now. I'm not speaking about somebody who comes in and puts $100 down and we never see them for 20 years. I'm speaking about those that actually pre-plan, funded. It was nothing for the family to do but tell me when they wanted to have the service. It's less stress on the family, and your money is protected because it goes into a trust, or it can be done through a pre-need insurance. And sometimes people get confused by that. In our state, you can't write a pre-need on existing insurance. It has to be pre-need insurance, and that's for a lot of different reasons that are too lengthy to go into, and I don't want to confuse people, but whatever you can do ahead of time, it's very important.
I'm sorry.
And if I might add one other thing, cremation has become quite popular. And while we have quite a few funerals that are followed by cremation, I encourage anyone that wants to be cremated, there is a form that the state of Alabama has that you can sign to put a specific person in charge of your body. And the reason that this is important is because again, Mama told me she wanted to be cremated, but then the beneficiary may say, Mama told me she wanted to be. It's always some. So if they have this in writing, it doesn't have to be a family member. This form authorizes the person to authorize whomever they select to be in charge of disposal of their body. And a lot of people don't realize that that can be done, but it can be done.
And also a lot of us don't realize that who's left when it comes to taking care of someone that's passed. You might be the next of kin to a great aunt because there's no one else, there's no other survivors. And you will be in charge of handling their affairs. And for some, that person may not really be close to you. And your first notion is to, okay, let's just dispose of them. cremated. And knowing that great aunt's wish was really to be buried maybe next to her husband or next to someone in the family. But she never expressed that to anyone, or it was never in writing. And that will ensure it taking place if she would have had a prearrangement. We have a lot of people who pass and there's no immediate relatives that live around, and we're charged with carrying out the service. Mm-hmm. We're going to carry out the service with or without family. Mm-hmm. Once that pre-need is established, we're obligated to carry out the wishes of that person. So those who may not have family, the best thing you can do is make sure that your you have your business in order, as far as a prearrangement down to your disposal of your assets. These are things that are very important to all of us. We tell everyone, even if you own a broom
and a dustpan,
you
need a wheel,
right? and you wouldn't believe, or some of you wouldn't believe, how many people come out of the woodwork when someone passes, and they're most concerned about what's left, yes. Not how can we assist in taking care of the loved one, making sure that we bury or cremate or do something with them. It's more so about what's left. And if you know that you have, even with children, a lot of us we were taught that, the oldest child is typically in charge. The oldest child may not be the wisest child.
Or responsible.
Mm-hmm. And you, parents know their children.
They do.
And you should put in place whomever you feel that will be responsible to take care of your affairs. And it may not be the oldest child, it may be the middle child, it may be the youngest child. But someone should be in charge of your affairs. Down to the worst case is when we have people that pass with savings accounts, checking accounts, and their name only appears on the account. And that account is locked. And you may only have, let's say if you only have $1,500 in it. Well, to open up an estate, it takes about $1,500
or higher
or more, and all the money's gone. A lot of people have left the money there, saying, well, if I can't get it, it's going to cost that much to receive it. I'm just going to leave it. There's literally millions of dollars out there that
and probate you don't want to
unclaimed. And
when they could just simply sign a beneficiary with the bank, all the banks have that form, and they can put a person's name they're not on the account. Yes. This is a form that says if something happens to me in the event of my death, this is who has access to my money. They can just walk right in with a death certificate and they have access to the money. They don't have to go. Probate is not quick. It's not a quick process. And one other thing I would like to add, for people who have insurance, it's a good idea to review your insurance. And I don't say this in terms of adding to it. I'm just saying we run into the problem where with deceased beneficiaries have not been changed. We run into the problem where the person never got around to listing a beneficiary. And when you have a policy that has no beneficiary, the company's going to make the check out to the estate of the person. So here we are again, where we're just taking the power of the pen to fill out the necessary forms and to check on it. And I even tell people, if you change a beneficiary and they don't write you back, you need to contact them and say, I sent this form in 6 weeks ago. I've not heard from you. It does not, what's happening, because what generally happens is it never got changed, and then it may be the ex-wife from 30 years ago, and they're not always willing to take care of.
Well, they're not obligated.
They're not obligated. That's true.
Yeah, most people don't understand that the beneficiary of an insurance policy It's actually funds that are given to them, and it's it. Uh, we have always assumed that, well, it's to take care of the funeral. Not necessarily. It's just funds to. It could be a gift. It's just money.
Sure.
And if you want it to be used to take care of your final expense, then it needs to be expressed to the beneficiary that the funds are to be used for this, whatever's left is for this. Or if you're not, if you, I won't say don't trust them, but if you want it carried out, you can also make out your funeral home or make your funeral home a beneficiary of a portion, a percentage, or state that my service has to be paid first and the balance goes to whomever. So there's a lot of ways around working that to make sure that you're taken care of. It's all about you. The funeral home really, as many years, well, I can speak for Royal, as many years Royal has been in service, we're here to really help the family. It's not about us. We have not only Royal Funeral Home, Mason Funeral Home in Athens, Medellin Garden of Peace Cemetery, that's the first minority cemetery, Perpetual Care Cemetery in North Alabama, which her father and a
And
friend
Mr.
started.
Kidd.
We have Medellin Mortuary. We have our own mortuary with a crematory in it, and various other things. So we are covered in, well, we cover the whole gamut for funeral service and disposing of remains. And we're here to really help educate the community on how to. And at any time, you can always call and we will sit down and just go over the details of how to prepare your service. We even have pamphlets that we hand out, which is called putting your house in order. And it's a booklet that you just fill out. And once you complete that booklet, you've actually put your house in order. And it could be funded, or it doesn't have to be funded, but at least the family will know. If you keep that with your important papers, if something happens, they can pull that book. It's in your writing, sign that this is what you would like as far as carrying out your wishes. And you wouldn't believe how much pressure that will take off of an individual, knowing that you have already at least put a plan together. And all they have to do is just follow the plan.